When you install Visual Studio with the mobile option selected, it adds a set of mobile emulators to your computer. These emulators are available as deploy and debug locations when working in mobile projects. You get a set of emulators for Android devices and another set for Windows Phone. Be aware, if you didn't install the mobile options or Xamarin during the Visual Studio install, you won't be able to follow along with this demonstration. For this demonstration, I have 3 projects in this solution. I have a portable class library which contains all the common code that I'll use across my Android and my Windows Phone applications. Note you can also have an iOS application, but I took it out of this project because I didn't want to complicate things. And with the iOS application, you have to have a Mac for the build server. So I took that out. Then I have an Android specific project and a Windows Phone specific project. Now the point of this demonstration is to show you that when I write code and debug it, I can run it in the emulator and still debug my code. So let me show you the code in the portable class library. It's in this first page.xaml file. This is the file that contains the markup or the user interface that the users will see. It's real simple. It's a stack layout with several labels and then a button, which when you click will increment a counter, and then a couple of output message labels down here on the bottom. And over in the code behind file, I'm wiring up an event handler for the size changed event. One of the things I want to debug is when the user changes the orientation of the device. So I'm wiring up a size changed handler, and then inside this first page underscore size changed, I'm outputting whether we're in portrait mode or landscape mode. And I'm also using a plugin that's part of Xamarin called the Device Info plugin. It allows me to look at things like the platform name, the ID, what device name I'm working on. So I'll output the name of the platform on one of my labels. In the button click handler, I increment a counter and then I output a message to the message label. In this case, it's the number of animals that we sighted on our trail today. You know how to debug. If you've watched any of the other videos in this chapter, you know that you go to debug and then start debugging. But we're working with emulators, so we have to pick our emulator first. To do that, I'll pick a startup project. In this case, I have the Android application as my startup. And as soon as you pick that, in this drop down here will show up a list of the available emulators. I'll be using this 5-inch KitKat phone. So I'm ready to debug the application. Now on my current build of Xamarin, there's some problems sometimes when I compile the application. So what I need to do first is go up to Build and choose Clean Solution. And then I need to do Build, Rebuild Solution. Otherwise I get an error. Now I'll click on this green triangle to start the emulator and start the debugging process. And here is my emulator. There's my application. This represents the Android OS, so I can click on the center button and see the normal Android interface, or I can click on the back button here to go back to my application. I have to go this way, I guess. When I click on the button, it adds the number of sightings, and you see I'm in portrait mode, and the current device is Android. Now, if I click on these buttons over here, these are part of the emulator. They allow me to simulate multi-touch input. I can use this to rotate items if I don't have a touch screen on my computer. I can go back to single mouse point input. I can also choose to rotate the device left or right. Now before I rotate it, let's switch over to my code. Check that I'm in a breakpoint. I am. And I'll put a breakpoint in my button click handler and in this size changed handler. Then I'll switch back to the device. And I'll click on the button again. You see that I hit my breakpoint in my code. So even though I'm in an Android emulator, all the debugging tools you know how to use, like the watch windows and the immediate windows, they all just work. I'll click on continue. And then I'll click on these rotate buttons. And that caused my size changed event handler to run. I'll press F11 to step through some of this code. There you go. And I'll rotate it back. At this point, I'll stop using the Android emulator and I'll switch over to the Windows Phone emulator. So I'll stop the debugging, right-click on the Windows Phone, make it my startup project, Now I get a different list of emulators. These are the emulators that Microsoft has for Windows Phone and for other Windows devices. So I'll pick this 4.7-inch 720p emulator. Then click on the green triangle. You see my breakpoint was hit. Let me bring my emulator onto the screen so you can see it. There it is. So at this point, the first size change event has fired, even though my UI is not available yet. So now I'll click on Continue. And there's my user interface. And as you can see, it says the current device is Windows Phone. When I click on the Add Citing button, you'll see that it hits my breakpoint. And if I were to click on the rotation buttons, you would see that the size changed event fires again. The emulators in Visual Studio are fast and easy to work with. Check them out if you have a mobile project.